Welcome to the Lead Every Day show. Our mission is to see a world well led. And our strategy to get there? To empower leaders like you to lead every day. So let's get to work.
What's the greatest gift you can give the men and women on your team? I'm Randy Gravitt.
And I'm Mark Miller.
And we want to welcome you to the Lead Every Day show. And Mark, that's my question for you today, man. I know what you've historically said, but I heard you may have a little bit different answer here today. So what do you think the best gift we can give? A lot of people listening who are leading people and they're trying to find them a gift. Maybe it's not even Christmas time either. Let's see if we can dive in and help the people that they're leading today.
Well, my answer, as you foreshadowed, my answer has changed over time. I do believe when the folks on your team sit around the table, the greatest gift you can give them is clarity. Clarity of vision, clarity of purpose, clarity of values, clarity of strategies, clarity on assignments and roles. And I mean, there's so many things. And so I still think that's huge. But I've probably going to make that 1A, and my number one is been elevated only because everything I just said only serves people at work. And I think there's something we can give them at work that will serve them in every area of their life for their entire life. Okay. And that is help them.
You got me hooked. I got to hear what you got.
Help them learn to think.
Okay. That's good. I'm not sure I've heard leaders talk about this very much. I mean, it's like that it sounds important, but I've been doing this a long time. You know, I'm kind of old like you, and I've not heard very many people talk about that at all.
Well, I haven't heard leaders talk about it either. And my fear is a lot of leaders aren't thinking about raising the thinking capacity of their people. They want them to do more work. They want them to have more sales and more profits and produce more widgets. But I just don't know how many leaders are focused on helping people around them think better. And I think it's a tremendous gift. And I actually think with some intentional effort, you'll be amazed at how well people will respond.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. And you know, in fact, if you think about it that way, and we can get people to teach people to think, it really can. I think you said it a minute ago. It really can serve people for the rest of their life. I mean, 40 years from now, if somebody be listening today and if they get this concept and really can bake it into their life, it could be transformational. So I love that. So I know how you are. I really do. You're just like me. We believe that you practice your way to high performance. You always say hope is not a strategy. So I think better is probably not going to work. We're going to need to give people some stuff to think about today as they try to improve their thinking and the ability to teach thinking. So we're
going to go a step further than giving people things to think about. We're going to give leaders things they can do to help others think better.
Yeah. That's going to be great. Okay. So, let's start with this first idea that we've come up with. We think it's important to set the expectation. So I've been around organizations before where if there's not a lot of thinking, I think this really is the number one thing. It's that the leader doesn't expect people to think. I've met so many leaders who are frustrated because they feel like that everybody around them is not really engaged like they need to be or doing what they need to do. And I think so many times that's a little bit of a symptom of here I come and he's going to do it anyway. And you think how many leaders have I had say to me, I think it's just easier for me to go ahead and do it. And that's really not what we want. We know that when we say it out loud, it just doesn't even sound good. And I think the same thing's true here with thinking. If we're not careful, we will think because we have a position in an organization that it's our job to do all the thinking. And that's really not what we want. We want to make sure that we set the expectation for everybody to think. So talk to me more about that idea.
Well, I think that we're living in the shadow of Frederick Taylor's work from over 100 years ago, and we've written about this. We wrote about it in our upcoming book, Lead Every Day. back in the day, for those that aren't familiar with the story, scientific management was all the rage. And there's a lot we'll not talk about here, but it has been summarized as a philosophy of leadership and organizational behavior in which three things are true. Leaders think, supervisors talk, and workers do. Now, we will reject that on face value today with our modern sensibilities. We'll say that's absurd. But I think it lingers, that mindset. I've often said it's a little bit like a hangover, that organizations just make assumptions that the leader's supposed to think. Now, yes, the leader is supposed to think, but so are men and women throughout the organization. And I think we really do just need to tell people you're expected to think. I remember years ago, I was looking for an administrative assistant, and the human resources department said they needed me to outline the responsibilities. And so I sent them a bullet list with 10 things on the list, and the first 8 were think. And then I think number 9, if I recall, was help keep me organized. And number 10 was, I don't even know what it was, because 8 out of 10 for me, whether it's an administrative assistant or any staff role or anybody who's joined my team, what I need first and foremost is their brain. And so I think you need to be really out front, because there are people, good people, this is not about who they are in their heart or character, that really just don't want a role where they have to think. They're looking for leaders to tell me what to do. And I would believe that that's a learned behavior. Probably we could go deep into their psyche to figure out where that comes from. And you'll blow their mind when you say, well, the first thing I want you to do is to think.
That's good. We've talked about before that I think this is a little bit of how this maybe fleshes itself out in an organization. But I know we've both talked about before that we believe the people closest to the problems are oftentimes closest to the solutions. And I think so many times that just gets stalled because we've not given them permission to think, to meet a customer demand, to improve a product, or to make a suggestion. It doesn't mean we're going to take everything that they say. They may not have all the context, and we may have to make a decision. But if we don't even have them thinking about how they're working, the old workers work thing. But basically, you're referring there to Frederick Taylor and that whole mindset of just it's just you just do your job. I think it's great to do your job, but part of your job, if you're a leader, or really even in any organization, wouldn't you want every single person?
Absolutely.
So I think this is a big expectation, just to set it early, that we're going to expect everybody to be thinking and trying to get better at what we're doing.
Yeah, and I like the way you summarize that, because a moment ago you said we want to give people permission. Permission is not what I'm suggesting. Yeah. An expectation is different. Permission is you can if you want to. I think step one is to create the expectation that we're going to value your thinking.
I love that. Okay, so you and I've been you and I both been a big fan of questions for a long time, and I think that would be number 2. We're going to set the expectations, but I think we need to ask more questions if we're going to think better, maybe more and better. And I know you've said, and I know actually a little shout out here. I know you just did a little picture taking excursion in the last couple of weeks, and you're the one who taught, and you made some good pictures, great pictures. That's incredible. One of the things you told me was, if you want to make good pictures, you got to make a lot of pictures. I think if you want to ask really good questions, you need to probably ask more questions than what you're asking. And so to me, this feels like a big one here. And I'd love for us to unpack maybe some questions that might be helpful. I'll tell you quick, something. My wife and I, we got a couple of decisions that we're trying to make. And I thought, how would I make this decision, or how would I get some help in making this decision? And we did the episode while you were gone. We did the episode on AI. Stuart, is helping me. And by the way, shout out to Stuart. But some of the people, I've met a few people the last couple of weeks, or they've texted me saying, hey, AI stuff was great. Made me think about a lot of stuff, which was great. But I thought I would go into AI and ask, this is my prompt. I said, I'm trying to make this decision. And I gave it the parameters. And I said, I need 50 questions to ask myself. And so, and so we had these 50 questions, which was great. But here's the wild thing. Question number 50, ironically, was the best question out of the whole list for what I was thinking about. And so I was able to say, give me 20 more questions that are similar to question number 50. And those last 20 questions, Mark, were unbelievable. And we've got an incredible conversation going on about these decisions we're trying to make. But those questions really sort of unlocked the way we were thinking about it. And I think in organizations, so many times stuff does get stalled out because we stop asking questions. So I know you're a big fan of this. You may want to say more there to set this up, but I want to give folks some questions that might be helpful here.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify what we're recommending. If you as the leader want to help people around you elevate their thinking, questions are a great tool. It is more questions, it is better questions, but in some ways it may be different questions. Questions that you know will require thought. Questions that you may have a hunch they don't have an answer for. Those are really powerful thinking questions. So as Randy said, we're going to give you some, and we're going to kind of run through these. And we know that some of you may be listening to this audio while you're driving. So don't try to take notes. We're going to include some questions in the show notes. So you'll be able to go back and reference those.
Yes, Stuart, we're going to need a PDF there, buddy. So,
and I want to start with one, Randy, which may feel really obvious, but sometimes I think we miss the obvious. And that is, what do you think? It's like, and just leave it there. And I've literally had people say, I don't know. And then you've got any number of responses, but I think we've got to fight the temptation as leaders to go, well, let me tell you what I think. Because you've polluted the water at that point. Not that you won't ever share your perspective, but if you're trying to get other people to think, don't default back into thinking for them. So you might say, well, what are you going to have to do to form an opinion on this? What are your next steps? Who could you go to learn enough to form your own thoughts?
Yeah.
You see where that goes? Those are questions that are designed to prompt additional thought, deeper thought. Don't let people off the hook if you say, what do you think? And they go, I don't know.
Yeah. So what do you think about, I mean, really anytime you have a problem, a project, anything you got, really, you can ask people, what do you think? And I love your reminder there that if you're the leader, to not share what you think first, because that does pollute the waters. It's the leader's voice is the loudest voice, and it will shut down thinking if we do that. Okay. So here's another good question, Mark. What was your process? I like to ask people, what was your process? How did you get to this conclusion that you're thinking about? And, it may be, I haven't given this a lot of thought. I mean, to think about it more. I mean, all kind of answers are going to come if you start asking people to push on it a little more, especially if they're not used to these kinds of questions. And I think the organization will get better at thinking about the way they think and how they're thinking and how they're getting to their conclusions, which can only be helpful.
Yeah, because remember, there are two things at play here, at least. One is you're trying to address an issue, solve a problem, seize an opportunity. You're not doing this for recreational activity, right? So you are trying to move towards a productive end or solution or next step. But all you're doing here is adding the secondary objective to help these men and women that are around you think better. And so when you say, what's your process? And you hear what they have to say, well, you may have follow-up questions. Like, who did you talk to outside of our industry? Because if they didn't mention anyone in their process, or have you done a literature review on this topic, and where would you go to begin that process?
Yeah, what have you read?
If they didn't mention literature review in them. So you're not just taking, here's what I'm trying to say. When you say, what's your process? And they tell you, you don't go check. I used that question that Mark and Randy shared with me.
Yeah.
No. You're evaluating their process, and you're going to challenge and encourage, probably with more questions, so that they can think deeper and think better, whether it's on the current situation or they learn something that they can apply in the future.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, give us another one. So we got a couple here. Give us number 3.
What were the options that you didn't present today?
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. You sort of alluded to another one. I like who have you consulted with? And again, you can do literature reviews and all kind of different. You can do research projects, everything. But I like. Have you talked to anybody else? Have you gotten any input? Have you gotten any feedback? Have you gotten anybody's previous perspective? A lot of times, other people have gone through stuff. We might even ask, have you seen somebody in a similar situation as this? Like, what did they do and what did you learn from that?
Mm-hmm.
So I like those kind of questions as well.
Yeah. And again, you'll learn a lot if these questions in my mind are not in order, but there's a little bit of an order. If you ask people about their process early, you'll get a lot of insights as to the level and depth of thinking, because they may check all the boxes. They may actually surprise you with the rigor and the diligence and the discipline that they've already applied. And then you affirm that and keep moving. A lot of these follow-up questions, you will discern if they're necessary based on some of these other questions. You can continue to probe and you can continue to go deeper.
That's good. Yeah. Okay. So here's one, Mark. This is one that this probably will push some people to think about it this way, but what were your, or let's say it this way. How much time did you spend thinking about the root causes of this problem? And a lot of times people will think, well, this is the problem or whatever. I would push a little further and say, did you come up with 10 possible root causes? I mean, again, this is going to push me to think about it. And then how did you narrow it down from 10 to the number one root cause? Because we're going to go after something that we think is the problem.
Right.
But a lot of times the problem may not be the problem. I mean, we think it is, but
rarely.
It may not be the root cause.
Rarely is the presenting problem the real problem.
That's right. There's a lot of times there's something behind the scenes going on. So.
Yeah, and I'll say this, and some of you have experienced this, your problem-solving efforts fail, and the reason they fail is you attacked the wrong root cause. You may think the root cause was the training, but in fact, it may be you didn't have the right individual or they didn't have the right skill set. So if you make the training better, but you keep putting the wrong people in the job, that problem is going to persist. So it's a non-trivial question to explore and to ask people. Again, I'll give you another variation on what you just said. What do you think the 5 most likely root causes are of this problem? And then, of course, assuming they're making a recommendation or they rank them for you, it's like, well, how did you reach this conclusion? How did you choose to rank these? So again, you're just trying to get inside their head. And again, maybe they've got great answers to all these questions, but my guess is you're going to elevate their thinking as you go down this path.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so another one might be something along the same lines. Once I choose one of those root causes, how much time did I invest in thinking through the options that we have? Because a lot of times we'll know, okay, this is the problem. Let's do this. And we really don't spend a lot of time thinking about what we're going to do to try to close that gap.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, you've taught me for years, it's time on task is so important here that we're spending some time thinking about what we're thinking about.
Yeah. Here's one. What would we need to do to ensure that this problem never resurfaces? Because sometimes the answer or the recommendation, if again, assuming you're using this in a problem-solving context, it's about a short-term fix. And I'm not suggesting we don't need a short-term fix. If there's a fire, you need to get it put out. But what would we need to do to ensure that this problem never returns? And for a lot of situations and a lot of people, that'll require another crank on, I got to think a little more. I got to think a little deeper. I got to think with a longer time horizon. All of those are good things.
Yeah, that's good. Years ago, I heard John Maxwell say that if you're working on a problem, oftentimes the numbers will tell you what to do. I like the question of what does the data say? I think sometimes we don't look at the real numbers, because a lot of times we want to gloss over those and pretend they're not real. And I think the numbers actually do tell us,
Yep.
what to do.
Yep.
So
let me give you a variation on that. I have literally had leaders say, well, there is no data. Well, you could respond as I did. What would it take to collect the data?
That's good.
And maybe they hadn't even thought about it because they just said, oh, there's no data. Well, no, wait a minute. But that doesn't mean you couldn't go after it. If you're trying to deal with a turnover problem and you say, what do exit interviews reveal? And they'll go, there are no exit interviews. It's like, well, what would it take to do 50 exit interviews? How much time? How long? What might we learn if we actually talk to the people that we're trying to prevent from leaving? So again, the follow-up question often is going to be where you get just another level deeper in the thought process.
That's good. I'll take us another layer deeper here. If you ask something like this, a couple of variations. We've talked about this with culture before, but if you're leading someone and you're wondering what they're thinking, obviously you can ask them, but give them a specific thing. So if you were in my seat, what would most concern you about our culture? I think that's a really great question. You're going to learn something and you're going to force them to think about that. And you may want to push them more than just on the spot. I want you to think about this for 3 days and come back with 6 recommendations. And I mean, you can push this any way you want to. I also love if a new leader took over your role tomorrow, what do you think is the first thing they would do? Again, this just kind of pulls me out of my box because I may have a pattern of behavior here, and this is going to cause me, if I was new and I didn't have any restrictions of time and experience, I mean, those are, a lot of times they're positive things, but sometimes we can walk by the same problem day after day after day, and we've gotten used to it, and a new person might really be able to unlock, something. And I think thinking about something like a new person that to me feels like a good discipline.
All right, but there are 2 more follow-up questions. So I love your question. If a new leader came in tomorrow, took your role, what would they do? And so they may or may not have an answer. Let's assume they have an answer. Well, the follow-up question is, why do you think they would do that?
Yeah, why? I like that.
And then, why wouldn't you do that?
Exactly.
So again, we're trying to get people to use their brain. And I think if you've not consciously done this, you're going to be pleasantly surprised at how people will respond.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, you got another question? You got a couple more here?
I think that's probably enough questions. I mean, we got more questions.
I want to give one more. This is a little bit quirky here, but I want you to share this because you told me one time. I don't know where you heard this or whatever, and this is going to sound crazy, so you have to unpack it for a second. But you asked the question one time to a team or somebody. I don't know where this came from, but how would you solve this problem if you were underwater? You remember that?
Yes.
Sometimes those, and where I want to go here is asking it in an absurd way. I've asked leaders sometimes, if you had half your budget and you still had to double your goal, what would you do?
Right.
And some of these questions I think can really unlock the potential of an organization or a leader. So say more about the underwater.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. There's another whole category. I didn't know how much we wanted to scare people today, but the extreme and the absurd and the nonsensical, again, your brain will work to respond if presented the challenge. And so let's take the underwater question. We were talking about onboarding people. Okay. And I won't give you the backstory, but the group had decided that was the opportunity. And I said, so how would you do it underwater? And of course, they all looked at me like I was an idiot, which was maybe deserved in the moment. I said, no. Seriously, how would you do this well if you were underwater? And they realized I was serious. And somebody said, well, when you go scuba diving, you always have a buddy. So maybe we need to give people a buddy. Like, okay, what else? They said, well, let's stay with scuba diving. And they said, you're going to have a little bit of classroom before they actually throw you in the water. So maybe we need to have a little bit of formal onboarding before we send people to their workplace. And you can see where this is going.
Yeah.
they found an analogy that was catalyzed by my question, and they came up with a half dozen ideas of things they weren't doing that they thought might help with the onboarding process. So extreme, absurd, bizarre will really make your brain work.
The brain is it really is amazing what will happen when we start thinking. Okay.
Which so, let me throw something in here in the bigger, list that we're making. Move away from questions for just a second. We know questions are powerful, but you can ask people to give you an analogy. If you're trying to help them think, say, well, can you give me an analogy? And you and I know that is deep water in and of itself, but you can say, well, it's like the brain is like a computer. It processes information and it stores information and it retrieves information. And all of a sudden you're thinking maybe a little more holistically about the brain because somebody said it's like a computer. Or finding a job is like finding a new pair of shoes, right? It's got to be something that fits, and it's got to fit your style, and it's got to fit your personality. And if your shoe doesn't fit, then you're miserable. And if you don't fit in your role, just if you ask them to create the analogy, that's going to require many people to think at a deeper level and to think a little differently than just, hey boss, here's the answer to the question you asked me.
That's great, Mark. Okay, so I want you to say just a little bit here about time. We alluded to it a minute ago, but just this idea of why do you think more leaders don't put more time on their schedule to think? And I know you've really talked about this, written about the idea of margin, and maybe that's part of it, or maybe that's all of it. I'm not sure here, but it just grieves me to think that leader after leader is frustrated because stuff, problems and keeps reoccurring, and they really don't spend very much time on this. And I was talking to a leader actually just this morning before we turned the cameras on, and he told me, he said, I'm really struggling. But basically he was saying I'm in the quicksand. It happens, and that's part of it. But I think this discipline to have think time on our schedule, it really is staggering how little of that's happening when I start talking to people.
Yeah, and I would say, as it relates to this specific episode, you need to be encouraging the people around you to allocate time to think.
Yeah,
the problems we're going to solve driving to work or while we're in the shower, they're non-trivial. We need to solve every problem we can solve, but the big problems, the challenging problems, the opportunities that we want to seize, in most cases, they're going to require more thinking than that drive to work or that 5-minute shower. And so it's true for leaders, but I think it's also true when we're trying to get other people around us to think, is to challenge them and encourage them to invest time thinking. Leaders specifically, I could make a case that may be one of the primary things we're paid to do. And if we want other people to raise their level of thinking, it's going to require some time on task.
That's correct. Okay, so I got one more I want you to talk about here before we go. So we've talked about setting the expectation, and then we said let's ask more and better, different questions, however you want to think about that. And then there's a third one, Mark. I'm going
to say the third one is give me an analogy. That'll help somebody.
Okay. That's good. I got one more I want to talk about here for a second, though. Let's talk about delegating outcomes, not activities. You've talked about this before. Say just a word about that before we go today.
Well, delegation is a great thing, and it's a tool in every leader's toolbox. But if you want people to think, you need to consider, when appropriate, delegating an outcome or a responsibility, not an activity. So you could create an expectation or delegate that an individual is supposed to make 40 sales calls this week, and that may or may not be the right answer. But you could consider saying we need a 10% sales increase or 5 new customers a week and ask the individual to figure out how to get there. And they may have a more appropriate strategy than making 40 calls. And if you're leery of what they're going to come up with, don't just release them, but you could say, here's the outcome, here's the goal, here's the objective. Bring me a plan, bring me a proposal, bring me a recommendation on how we would get that done. Again, so many leaders think delegation, or they default to delegation that is task specific. And again, sometimes that's going to be appropriate, but that generally doesn't help people think. If you're not careful, they become hired hands, just doing what they're told, when they're told, how they're told.
So good. Just such
All
good
right.
stuff.
Hey, I know we're out of time. I want to throw in one more. It's a little bit out there, but I say it's out there. If you've paid consultants in your organization, most consultants are gifted at what I'm about to ask you to do. When you're trying to help a member of your team raise their level of thinking, ask them if they can draw it for you. Draw the problem, draw the solution. Ask them to represent their thinking in a diagram, in an illustration, in a picture. There's a whole skill set there. In fact, a lot of consultants are taught how to visualize ideas. So for a lot of people, that'll tap into a different part of their brain, and it will enable them not only to think more deeply, sometimes it'll bring clarity to the problem or the recommended solution when you have to illustrate it. Literally draw it on a whiteboard, on a piece of paper, on a flip chart. And I think that'll help a lot of people think better.
So much good stuff today. A lot of practical stuff. And if you're looking for some more practical stuff, I hope you'll get a copy of Lead Every Day. I'm holding it up here. If you're watching on the YouTube channel, our book, Mark, we're about 3 weeks, I think, from launch day, early September. This is coming out, and these 3 disciplines in our operating system, really cool. Going to help people to become better leaders, to improve their team's performance, and ultimately to strengthen their organization. But I'm convinced after today's episode, one of the things that we can all do as leaders is raise the value of thinking. We would go back to where we started today. I think it might be the very best gift that you can give yourself and the people around you. So that would be our challenge for you. Let us know how we can help. Love that we got so many people listening and sharing the content. And I hope you will continue to share with your friends and family. Hit the subscribe button if you've not done so. You'll make sure you get all the episodes, and we'll look forward to connecting with you next week. We got a fun topic next week, Mark. Can't wait to discuss that with you. Remember, the best leaders lead every day.